Good afternoon. Glad to see some smiling faces on this beautiful day. I'm very happy to introduce to you today Peg Thomas, who's going to be discussing her career as a writer, and she has other activities she's going to share with us next month. So glad to have you here. So she's going to discuss with you her process for writing and talk about some of the books she has written. So we'll be learning a lot today. Welcome, Peg. Thank you.
Well, as she said, my name is Peg Thomas, and I am a spinner of yarns. And as I look around here, I realize all of you understand that. When I first picked out that tagline, spinner of yarns, I thought it goes great. It goes with my spinning wheels, goes with telling a story. Do you realize that no one under the age of 40 knows what spinning the yarn means? Either way. So everywhere I go where there's younger people, I have to explain it. Maybe it wasn't the best tagline, but I still like it. So I kept it up there. And what I do is I use real history, fictional characters, and I tell American stories. And just a little bit about my background now that I figured out how to work the computer. I am a multiple award-winning author and freelance fiction editor. In 2019, I was very honored to be a finalist for the American Christian Fiction Writers Editor of the Year. That was probably a crowning moment right there. 2019, I was the winner of the Faith, Hope, and Love Readers' Choice Award. In 2021, I was a finalist again in that award. Last year, 2022, I won the SAILA Award for historical romance, and I also placed second. I entered 2 books that year, and I took first and runner-up, which was really a thrill. And this year, I'm a finalist again in the SAILAs, and I won't know if I win until June. You'll see there's nothing up there for 2020, COVID. So we all sat home and did nothing for a year, so that one's missing. But I've had a lot of fun entering the contests, and it's been really nice to pick up some wins. How did I get started on this? I have people ask me that all the time. It started with the phrase, someday I'm going to write a book. And you know how you never really think you're going to do it? You ever say something you never really think you're going to do? Well, if you've been here on some of the shipwreck presentations, you've met my son. He's an only child. And that's why he's so big. God gave me one, so he gave me a big one. And when he left home, the empty nest really hit me hard. I didn't think it would. I thought I would be the one, laughing and slapping the door shut, but it didn't happen that way. And I just needed something to fill my time. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I remembered that someday I was going to write a book. That was in 2009. So I didn't start this young. I started it later on. But I'm really glad I did. I'm really glad I dug into it. And I'm really glad I didn't know how much I didn't know when I started, because it's a whale of a learning process. This is not your high school English at all. It's a completely different type of writing. So the first thing I did, being in the 2000s, was I went online and I Googled writers. Being a Christian, I looked up Christian writers, figured that was a safe bet. And I found an online group called christianwriters.com. I don't even think it exists anymore, but it was a nice place to get my feet wet. And I would ask everybody, hey, I'm brand new. What do I do to start this journey? Every single person said, go to a writer's conference. I didn't even know what a writer's conference was. Back to Google. And by golly, we have them here in Michigan. Who knew? We have a whole bunch of them here in Michigan. But down near Muskegon, there was a Christian Writers Conference called Maranatha that looked safe. We'll put it that way. I was still pretty timid about all this. And I thought, well, this looks like a safe place to go. It's not Detroit. It's not Lansing. It's little old Muskegon. This ought to be pretty low key, ho hum. So I went. It was Monday through Friday back then. And coincidentally, right down the road, 2 miles down the road, was a state park. So I talked my husband into taking our camper down, a little pop-up camper. And that way I only had to pay the tuition to go to the conference. I didn't have to pay room and board. And I said to him, while I'm there, you could go golf. Well, when you mentioned camping and golf, husband's all in. So he went with me and took me to the conference every day, did his thing, picked me up at night. And after that first one, I was just boggled. The amount of information that just kept coming and coming and coming. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it all. But in the process of entering or signing up for it, they had a contest you could enter. So I thought, well, might as well, in for a penny, in for a pound. And I entered the essay contest and I won the thing. And that was a huge boost. I don't know if I hadn't won that, if I would have kept writing, because by then I knew how much I didn't know. And it was kind of scary. I wound up going back the next 2 years. So I did 3 years in a row at Maranatha. And the third year I went, for one thing, I got to meet Jerry Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind series. That was really a thrill. I learned a lot from him. And I met some other really interesting people, including my agent. I wound up signing an agent that third year. And in publishing these days, you pretty much have to have an agent. That's the only way you're going to get to a publisher. They don't accept submissions anymore from John Q. Public. So I was very excited about that. She took my novels that I had started and she read the one that I submitted to her. And then she would take it to the publishing houses and start submitting to them. And that's where you get this basically enough pink paper to, plaster a wall of rejections. That's part of it too. But at the same time, my son started dating a gal from downstate. He was living down there at the time. And her sister was also a literary agent. Small world. And we got to know each other a little bit on social media. And the sister said to me, "Do you know anything about the Pony Express?" "Well, sure. I knew it delivered mail and it included horses. What did you have to know, right?" And she said, "Well, Barber Publishing is putting together a collection of stories, historical romances on the Pony Express." And I first wanted to put my heels down because I never wanted to write romance. I always wanted to write historical. But I have already found out, having the agent, that publishers don't want to buy historical. They want to buy historical romance. Romance is the best-selling genre, always has been, always will be. So I just said, sure, I'd love to do that. And she told me how to submit my proposal to, through my agent and everything. And by golly, I got in it. Couldn't believe it. I was thrilled. My first contract, I signed it in 2016. Remember, I started writing in 2009. So if you do the math, 7 years of learning before I got my first contract. I can't tell you how many rejections because I never kept track. Once I was in that collection, somebody who was in it with me started the Bouquet of Brides collections, and she invited me into it, because that's another way you can get into it, is if the other authors start a collection and invite you in. Well, I was thrilled. And my novella in that collection is one of them that was an award winner. And then I got invited into the Backcountry Brides collection. And I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. But why not I make my own collections? And I wanted to showcase our Great Lakes, because, like my son, I also love the Great Lakes. And so I headed up the Great Lakes Lighthouse Brides, which was one of the best-selling collections ever put out by Barber Publishing. It is discontinued now, but it completely sold out. I managed to get the last of the returns back from the publisher, and some of the local shops have them. And that's the last of those. It was such a good seller. I also went on and headed up the Blacksmith Brides and the Lumberjacks and Ladies. And my story in Lumberjacks and Ladies is set right here in Alpena, which was a lot of fun. And actually, my story in the Great Lakes Lighthouse Brides is set on Thunder Bay Island. So I got to use some real local history. When I was writing Lumberjacks and Ladies, I went on the Facebook group, What's Up Alpena? And I asked people, I said, I'm going to be writing a book. It's a fictional story, but if you want the names of any of your ancestors who were lumberjacks in it, let me know. And so there are names of actual lumberjacks from the area. It's not their story. I told them it's going to be fiction, but I will use their names as the characters with your permission. And so I got permission to do that. And that was a lot of fun. But my novels weren't going anywhere. About the time I got out Sarah's Choice and my agent was shopping that around, the whole George Floyd thing happened. And where I like to write, the history that I enjoy the most is Colonial America. And colonialism became a bad word. And we couldn't get a publisher to look at it. And it's not just me. If you go into the stores right now, you won't find anything colonial through Civil War new on the shelves. The publishing industry just got very leery of it. The small publishers were still doing some, but the big ones are saying, no, we just can't. We can't publish these stories right now. And so, if I can get this to go. Kicking and screaming, I was launched into self-publishing. This was the only way I was going to get my books out. And I really wanted the stories. I had stories to tell. I had some of them already written. And I was very prepared for it because for 3.5 years, I worked with Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas, and I was the managing editor for Smitten Historical Romance. Obviously, by then I had already come to the terms of the fact that I was going to be writing romance if I wanted to be published. And I had a chance to work with the managing editor, which meant I walked every book through every stage of production. And so I knew how to do it. I knew how to do it well. I knew how to hire editors. I knew how to hire cover artists. And I didn't want to do it. But once I finally got there, I've really enjoyed it. It's really been a lot of fun. My first series that I released was Forts of Refuge. Sarah's Choice was the one that won the Sailors Award last year. Maggie's Strength was second place. Abigail's Peace is a finalist this year. All 3 in the series have finaled in the Sailors, and I was really happy about that. That one is set in colonial America. Yes.
I know Forts of Refuge, it's about female.
Yes.
And a more perfect union is about male. Is that?
That's on purpose. Yes. Forts of Refuge is definitely a heroine-driven series, and A More Perfect Union is a hero-driven series. And I did that. They're all historical romance. One of the things I like to do is explore things from different angles. And so, for instance, in Forts of Refuge, there were 3 forts that did not fall to Pontiac's rebellion in 1763. The 3 forts were Pitt, Detroit, and Niagara. So I set one story at each fort. The 3 stories literally take place at exactly the same time. They don't have to be read in any order. They don't intermingle at all. But it was setting a fort, setting a story at each fort that survived and trying to find the different points of view. So in Sarah's Choice, both hero and heroine are both British. So you're just getting the British point of view. So it's a very slanted point of view. Naturally, that's what it would have been at that time. Maggie's Strength, my heroine, is also British, but she was abducted and was raised by Indians. So from 12 years on, she was raised by an Indian tribe. And then my hero is a Frenchman. And we're talking right after the French and Indian War. The French left, but there were a lot of Frenchmen that were born here. They didn't want to go back to France. They'd never been here. They had to swear allegiance to the British to stay. And of course, they swore that allegiance with, fingers crossed behind their back. So that was another point of view to bring in. And then Abigail's Peace, heroine was again British. The hero is actually a Seneca Indian. And the Seneca were an interesting tribe during this time because they split over the whole Pontiac deal. Half the tribe fought with Pontiac, and probably not quite half, and the rest of them refused to. So that was a fun angle to explore as well. So I tried to look at an event and look at it from the different sides and see how the different people would have reacted to it. In Maggie's Strength, the girl that was abducted actually comes from a piece of my family history. In the prologue, I write about the abduction. I'm related to the McCords of Fort McCord, and there was an actual raid on that fort, which was pretty much just a blockhouse. That's what frontier forts were at that time. They didn't have the big stockade. They were just a blockhouse. And there were kids that were abducted. And during that, my character is fictional, but I started with that and brought a little of my family history in just for fun. And then I went to More Perfect Union, as you mentioned. You notice that's a hero-driven story. In that one, all 3 of my heroes are ex-cavalrymen from the Civil War having to rebuild their lives. And again, I wanted to look at it from the different angles. So one of them is physically wounded in the war. He's physically changed. One of them is emotionally damaged during the war, and the other is financially ruined in the war. So here's 3 ways that they have to overcome and build their lives again. And again, you can read these in any order because they're all set in 1867. In the first book, they're both from the North. In the middle book, he's from the North, she's from the South. And in book 3, they're both from the South. Because again, I want to show history from the different angles. I want people to get into it and learn about it. I'm very passionate about history, so I want to show as much of the different parts of it as I can. So those have been the 3 series that I've released so far. Silver Prairies actually doesn't come out till next month. That one is, that's the last release in that series. And then here's a sneak peek at the next series. You guys are seeing these covers before anybody else. Well, at least the last one for sure. This is actually the first series that I wrote. This was the one that my agent signed me for that she really enjoyed. And this one is historical fiction, not historical romance. It's also the only one that'll need to be read in order because the characters build from story to story. Freedom's Price will come out in September, Freedom's Pride in January, and Freedom's Promise will come out next May. I've got it about half written. First was written, second was half written. We're going to work on the rest. I had a lot of fun with this series. Again, digging into my family history. My family were Quakers on one side, and on the other side, they were Welsh immigrants. And the background of this one is the Quaker migration, late 1700s, early 1800s, when the South no longer permitted freeing slaves. The Quakers would live in the South, would buy slaves and set them free. They didn't believe in slavery. When that became illegal, and the Northwest Territory opened up as a free territory, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, then the Quakers would just pack up their entire meetings, which is what they called their communities, would pack up and move north. And so we had this huge Quaker migration, and that's the background history of this series. And the gentleman on the last cover is actually a Black Quaker, which was fairly common as they got freed by the Quakers. Quite often they would stay with them. And so he has an interesting story to tell too. So initially it was going to be just the first two books. Well, initially it was going to be one. And then suddenly I realized I had way too much information. So I thought, well, I'd do two books. And then I realized that as I tracked the migration, I chose Midland, Ohio, where they were going to stay. And then I realized part of the Underground Railroad started in Midland, Ohio. And it's like, well, okay, Zachary's going to have his story then. As you dig into it and you get into the history, the ideas are just there. It makes a lot of fun for me. I have a lot of fun with it. And I have an awesome cover artist. I do not do the covers myself. This gal is just amazing. We had a hard time finding a Black man with hair that would have been age appropriate or era appropriate. And I don't know how she did it, but he looks just like he should look for that, the whole neck cloth, everything. So big kudos to her. She makes my books look good. And how do I find my stories? This is the second thing I get asked the most. I am 100% history geek. I was the girl in junior high reading biographies and documentaries and boring all my friends because they were all reading, Nancy Drew and everything else. And I'm like, yeah, but did you see this on Robert E. Lee? And they're all like, and I guess I learned my love of history from my grandfather. My grandfather was an amazing storyteller. He was born in 1909. He lived through so much history. He worked for Henry Ford, the man, not the person. My grandpa was actually a tenant on one of Ford's farms and worked for him in a personal capacity. He had so many stories to tell, and he knew how to tell a story, and they were all about the past. And I just loved to sit and listen to Grandpa when he would start to talk. And I think that fueled my love of history and my love of storytelling. So that's where my stories come from. They're almost all out of history, but I also draw deeply off my family tree. I don't know if any of you have ever used the Geni program. It's GENI.com. There's a free site there. I just use the free access, actually. You can also get more information if you pay for it. I am blessed to have all of my family genealogy because I had an uncle and cousins who were just fanatics about digging it up. I'm too lazy to do it all myself, I'll be honest. But I have 3 cousins and 1 uncle who, my uncle started back in the 1970s. He was doing it before it was cool. So we have our family tree traced back to, we go back to the royal line in Wales, and that one traces back to about the 600s, believe it or not. The rest of them, we have traced back all of them into the early 1600s. 3 of my 4 grandparents, we can trace back to the 1600s, between 1620 and 1640. So they came over in the Quaker and Puritan migration. My family's been here for almost 400 years. So there's a lot of history. The Geni program is wonderful because once you get out, if you look on some of mine, Angelique Young, who was Yale, there's 20 more people beyond her that we can tap into. There's 22 beyond Horace Young. And when you get back that far, America wasn't that big when we were colonies. So I am related to everybody. And it's really fun. It's really fun on Jenny. If you go and just to Google and you type in Abraham Lincoln Jenny, Geni, it'll bring up this of Abraham Lincoln, right? And there's a button above it. If you have your information in Jenny, you can punch it to see if you're related, which is just fascinating. I am related to 43 of the 46 presidents of the United States, blood relation, not in-law. 43 of the 46. I am not related to Joe Biden. I am not related to Donald Trump. I am not related to Woodrow Wilson. But because their bona fides is on the line as a company. But I also know from from the family, we knew we were related to FDR. We knew we were related to his wife, even closer. Found out my closest relative on the presidents is Ulysses S. Grant, but no surprise because he and FDR were cousins. So when you start looking at the different presidents, especially the early ones, they were all related. So if you're related to any of them, you're almost related to all of them because we just didn't have that many people in this country. And they were amazingly related. But through all this research, story ideas start coming, right? As I'm digging, I call it digging up bones. As I'm digging around in the computer, looking at the family, I found out I had a whole bunch of family in Salem during the witch trials. Anybody want to guess what a series is coming out in the future? Oh yeah, I'm digging into that because I found out one of the families were, they were Quakers. And the others are all pure, the witch trials, if you remember your history from way back when, the witch trials, that was all the Puritans. That kind of did the Puritans in. This was like the demise of the Puritans, but they were the ones involved in the witch trials. And the Puritans hated the Quakers. Like they hated them. They would kill them, hate them. Right. And so 5 of my relatives at that time appeared to have been Puritans. 2 of them were Quakers. So I've got all kinds. My family never could get along, folks. Really. If you look at my grandpa's tree, they were all Tories during the Revolution. And my grandma's side, they were all Quaker, or they were all patriots. So, my family's been fighting each other forever.
Were there any indentured people in your family tree?
Not that I have found, but I do use that in one of my, but I have not found any indentures in mine. I don't know that there could have been that I just don't know, that we just don't have documentation. That would have not been unusual. But because some of mine does go back to a royal line, definitely not through them. So like I said, we had so much of our family tree already explored before it ever became an online thing that I was able to plug it in and go, which was really fun. But the Jenny program, like I said, it is free. It's fun to mess around with. And it's so well connected that you can pick up people. It's amazing what you can do in this day and age. So anyway, that's my other idea for where I draw off is I look at my family tree, find out what was going on back then and see if it sparks any. Matter of fact, in a more perfect union, the series that I'm finishing up releasing now, the germ of the idea came from my great grandfather who was in the Civil War. He was in the Michigan 7th Cavalry, which kind of made me want to go to, say, well, let's see what the cavalrymen did. He makes a cameo appearance in the first book. I was able to write my great-great-grandfather in there. Obviously, I never knew him. I did know his son. That was my grandpa, and I was 9 when he passed away. So that was kind of cool. It's fun to draw off that, and it's fun to draw off my love of history. And then what I try to do is once I've established a historical event that I want to write around, like post-Civil War or Pontiac's Rebellion, or the Quaker migration, then I ask myself, research. Let me back up a step. I research. Okay, once I find the historical event, I research, more research. And I really do look like her, except with gray hair. And I'll sit with books all around. I have a wonderful friend who has a master's degree in library science. He's wonderful. Email. Paul, help. I need firsthand accounts here, firsthand accounts there. He finds me journals and diaries. And when I wrote Forts of Refuge, I had 3 firsthand accounts of the event. One written by an American soldier, who would have been a colonial American soldier. We were all British at the time, but colonial American soldier. One was written by a French Jesuit. And they were not even in the same place. One was in Pitt, one was in Detroit. And stuff they wrote, it matched up. The history matched up, which was great. And the other was a survivor, a young British man who was taken captive by the Indians during that time. And he wrote his experience afterwards. And again, it matched up with the other firsthand accounts, which was really interesting. So that was a lot of fun. Yes.
As a side question, how many of the things that you're reading are provided in print, and how many things are provided electronically? Now, in other words, a lot of these books are being transferred to electronics as opposed to keeping them around forever. Are there any of those? Is that happening more right now, or are you still accessing books?
A lot of the older stuff, I still have to access books if I can find them, because they have not been brought over to a digital. Especially the firsthand accounts, I did have to buy a physical book to get that. One of them was, two of them, I got the physical book. One, I was able to get a digital version.
What would you say? 40, 50 digital
It really
books?
It really depends on the era. The farther back you go, the harder it is to find them digitized yet.
Okay.
But the more recent history, they get it, I think they get it in digital form faster.
I think it's so frightening to know that all these things are going to be digitalized eventually.
Well, when they digitalize those, they literally are just scanning the page. So they're not changing a word of it. When I read it.
Are the books going to be forever kept, or are they going to?
Well, Library of Congress will always keep their copies. Yes. But a lot of those, I mean, you think the ones I've been looking at recently, kind of going back and looking at some stuff pilgrim wise, just some personal research I've been doing and not setting a book there yet. But when I go back and look at it, the condition of it is so poor that we're going to lose it anyway. The paper copies are going to just disintegrate at some point, other than the ones that are kept in archive quality. But so when they can digitize them, actually, instead of losing them, we're saving them. We're saving them because they're pushing 400 years old, and everything sort of has an expiration date. So being able to scan them and save them is preserving them for future generations, except of course they all wrote in cursive. So I don't know how long we're going to have people who can read them. And it's a cursive even different than we. Honest, gosh, some of it is really hard to write. They wrote different than we did. They used the long S, which looks like an F to us and is not. And even knowing that and knowing how to read some of these, I really struggle with some of it because they just wrote so differently than we do today. Not only their grammar, but their spelling was not as uniform as spelling is today. And just even the shape of the letters were different. So yeah, it's good that they're saving what they can. It's good that they're going to have both available. The archive copies will still be there, but we won't have the ability to see in person most of these anymore because they're just too old. When you see the scans and you see the edges of the pictures or pages, and they're all tattered and ripped, just the age. That's a good question. Yeah. How do you find, all this stuff? And Google Books has a lot of the old ones scanned in. And then, like I said, having a friend who is knowledgeable in libraries has really helped. He can find things that, every writer should have a friend in a library, put it that way. And then the last thing I do, once I know what my event is, once I know where and when it's going to happen, then I start looking at my characters, because it doesn't work if you put the wrong kind of character in the wrong kind of setting. So you really need to look at where things are. For instance, in Silver Prairies, my hero was going to wind up in San Antonio, Texas. I didn't know anything about San Antonio, Texas, other than where it was on a map. And so I started digging into it. Well, it was settled by Germans. Who knew? I suppose people who live there know, but people who live in northern Michigan, not so much. So I got looking into it, and I realized that a lot of my characters had better be speaking German. A lot of my characters better have German names. It blew me away. I don't know why I didn't realize it. I used to live in Kansas, and there were tons of German communities, but I didn't put it together. So learning that helped me to get accurate names for my characters. And one of my favorite things to do, it's hard when I'm too far back because we didn't have a census until 1790, but anything written after 1790, I'll go to the US Census. and I will go to the closest area in the birth year of my characters, and I'll look up names. And I'll pick a first name that I like over here and a last name I like over there and put them together so that I'm getting authentic names into my characters. That's going to be a good snapshot of their background as far as were they German, were they French, were they Polish, whatever. And it's going to keep the flavor of the time period pretty solid in my writing. And I've had people really get excited when they see a name in my book and say, "Oh my goodness, that's my mother's maiden name," and it shows up, with people who know the area, they know the names. When I wrote the one set on Thunder Bay Island, I used the last name of Wilson for one of the main characters because the Wilsons were big in that area at that time. So I borrowed their last name. So I go out and I discover my characters, not only what is their names or what are their nationalities or their backgrounds would be, but what do they do? What do they do? Why did they wind up where they are? The Thunder Bay Island book story that I wrote, I had to try to figure, I wanted to start with the wreck of the James Davison. James Davison tried to sail over the top of Thunder Bay Island. Didn't work so well. So he wrecked right there on the shoals. And I wanted my hero to be a stowaway. But who on earth would be a stowaway on the boat going from Buffalo to Duluth? So I had to go look it up. Well, at the time, the most immigrants we were getting that were interested in farming, because at that time Duluth was all about farming, were Russian immigrants that were escaping from the pogroms. And so that let me tap into a little world history, and I wound up with this Russian character. I thought this was going to get me in all kinds of trouble, because when I wrote that book was the whole Russian scandal going on around President Trump. And here I am Googling all these Russian things, and I figured the government was probably watching me really closely about then. I was just trying to figure out a couple of Russian words that I could put, and I was researching the pogroms when Russia tried to exterminate the Jews. And so I was researching the background of what would force him to come here. I have to have the background. I have to know why my characters are there. And sometimes that's a lot of deep research, but that's what makes them authentic. And especially when I'm writing history, I want my stories to be as authentic as they possibly can be so that people can immerse themselves in the history, can connect with the characters, so it all makes sense. My most difficult one was in Abigail's piece. That was the last one in Forts of Refuge. And I wanted my characters, because that was my heroine-driven story, I wanted my heroines to be as different as possible. So the first one, she's tall, she's strong, she's resolute. The middle one, she's the Spitfire. And how could I, and they were both, very comfortable on the frontier. So what could I do for Abigail to make her different? I could make her a Boston Miss. She can be a society girl. Well, okay, but how am I going to get her to Fort Niagara? I had to come up with a reasonable way some Boston Miss would get herself to Fort Niagara. Well, what if her uncle, her favorite uncle, was stationed there at the fort? Okay, that would work. But then I had to get into her background story. Why did she leave her parents? Well, maybe her parents are deceased. Okay, well, who would she live with then? Probably an older brother. Oh, what if he's an older half brother and doesn't treat her very well? So I'm going through all this in my head to make Abigail who she is. So then I know how Abigail's going to react once she gets there. She's going to be a little bit of an airhead, because you got to be a little bit of an airhead in 1763 to get yourself into, Fort Niagara during a war. So she had to be a little goofy. And she is in the beginning. And I've had so many readers say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think I was going to like her at first, but boy, she came through in the end." And that's called the character arc. That's what writers want. Your character should mature throughout the book. So you need to have space for them to mature. You need to have space for them to change. But in order to do that, you have to know so much about their background so that you know how they will logically behave in any given situation. By the time I'm done writing these, I know these people. I know them upside down. I practically got their fingerprints in my computer. But that's what makes it really interesting to write it, and it makes it easy for me. I love my secondary characters. Cobalt Skies has a character named Cooter. Cooter is a young hillbilly boy. He rode for the Pony Express. He winds up out west, and he is just absolutely a character. I have so many people writing and say, "Oh, Cooter needs his own book." I'm like, no, Cooter would kill me trying to get a whole book out of him. But he's one of those characters that you can relate to because he's just different. He's a little bubble off plum, and he's a lot of fun to write. And people really, but I had to know him. I had to look, okay, how did he get to be that way? Okay. His mom was a prostitute. He was raised by his granddaddy who took him away from his mama. I have to go through all this in my head. None of that is in the book, but I know how he got there and how he wound up like he is. So it makes it a lot of fun. And then I've done the research, I got the history, I've figured out my characters, and then the real work begins. That was the easy part, folks. Now I got to write the book. And my husband likes to say way too often, that book ain't going to write itself. And he's right. It comes down to discipline of putting the butt in the chair and the finger on the keyboards and doing the work. And I do treat it as a job. I get up in the morning, have coffee, a little time with the hubby. By 9 o'clock, I'm at my desk and I'm at work. And I will work till about 11:30. I get up, get on my elliptical for half an hour. I hate that thing, but I need it. And have a little lunch, go back up. If I have an editing project, then I start editing. And if I have another book to work on, or if I'm, just continue the one I was doing, or if I need to do some marketing. After dinner, we watch news together. My husband loves to watch sports, not my thing. I'll go up and do a couple more hours of research or marketing or editing or whatever needs to be done. So pretty much a full-time job for me, pretty much equates a full-time job. And then once I'm writing the book, I also order the book cover. As you saw, I showed you the 3 on the series that's going to come out next year. I haven't even written one of those books yet. I've already got the cover, but I knew what the series was going to be. Easier to have her make them all at once so they match nicely. So I just order that book cover as soon as I can get it. There's also always a waiting time for book covers. Real good cover artists are in demand, and I may order it and I may not be able to get it for 2 or 3 months. So you can't wait the last minute on that one. And then I have a group of critique partners. We call ourselves the Quid Pro Quills. It works. And there's 6 of us, and we submit our books to everybody to be read and critiqued. And these gals are sharp. I get my critiques back, and it looks like, the slaughter there in Valentine's Day Massacre. It's red all over my papers. They do a great job. After that, it goes to my editor, who again slashes it all up. Then it goes to my book endorsers, and these are published authors. In the front of my books, it will say their recommendations, and they're people who are traditionally published mostly. Then it goes to my book influencers. I have an advanced reader team of 20-some gals who read the book ahead of time, have their reviews ready. The day it goes live on Amazon, they're posting their reviews for people to see. So we get a good jump on it. It also then, after I get it back from my editor, critique partner, everybody's been through it, it goes to my proofreader. I pay a proofreader to go through it one last time because I'm going to make changes based on what everybody said. Someone needs to go through it again for me. Even though I'm an editor, I can't see my own mistakes. Nobody can. If anybody tells you they can edit their own books, they're not telling you the truth because you know what you meant to say and you will read what you meant to say, not necessarily the words that are there. It's goofy, but it's true. Once I get it back from the proofreader, then I have to format the ebook and paperback copies, and the last it uploads to Amazon, and then finally release day. And from the time I start my research to the time I release a book, it's probably about 9 months to a year. But I am researching the next book while I'm writing one, so they overlap. And so I'm pretty comfortable. Right now, I've been putting out 3 books a year. I'm going to drop it down to 2 because I had some already written that my agent hadn't been able to sell. But I'd probably be dropping it down to 2 books a year before too much longer because it's a pace to keep up. And yeah, my husband says he's retired now. We should probably do some retired people stuff. So we'll be slowing it down a little bit. You can find me if you're interested. The URL above, pegthomas.com. And I'm on Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you look me up anywhere, I am the only Peg with 2 G's. Everybody else has 1 G or they put a Y on the end. Peg spelled that way is actually the last name spelling, but my brother's name is Greg and my mom always spelled it Gregg. So I'm Peg, Pegg. And then our sister, who wants to guess?
Nick?
Wouldn't you think? No, it was Leslie. We never really figured that out, but mom did her own thing. That's all I can say. If you're interested in signing up for my monthly newsletter, there's a QR code up there. It's also on the bookmarks I have on the back table. If you want to take a bookmark on your way out. I put out a monthly newsletter with updates of my writing, updates of my fiber arts. I'm going to be here next month with my spinning wheels, my antique spinning wheels. That's my other spinner of yarns part. And put a lot of fun content on there. A lot of times I ask people for names, either in a book or my spinning wheel. My latest spinning wheel I refurbished. I couldn't come up with a name. So I asked my newsletter readers and I did a poll and they named her Abigail. So it's a good name for her. It fits her really well. Sometimes I have different things about a character. I'm not sure which way I want to go. I'll put out in the newsletter, what do you gals think? And they'll give me ideas. I actually released a More Perfect Union before the Path to Freedom series because I asked my newsletter readers, what do you want next? Do you want me to stay in Colonial America or should I do a post-Civil War? And that's what they picked. So it's very interactive. It's a lot of fun to engage with people throughout the newsletter. And other than that, anybody have any questions? Yes.
So when you began, you said how different your writing is now than what you were, say, with that high school or something.
Right.
And talk a little bit about the difference.
Fiction writing is not your classic English writing. For one thing, when we were taught in English, it was always what we now call purple prose. You were supposed to use a lot of adjectives, a lot of adverbs. You were supposed to build these big, beautiful sentences. Fiction writing is straight and to the point. Instead of, she approached the big, black, burly horse, you pick one. It's big or black or burly. You don't use them all. They want to streamline it down. And part of the reason is we have gone from writing omniscient point of view, which is what the classics were written in. Omniscient point of view is the God looking down and telling the story. And as God looking down, telling the story, he knows what everybody's thinking and doing and saying. And so you're hopping from person to person. And he's, he is a narrator. He's actually an outside person telling the story. We now write in what's called deep third point of view or deep first. And in deep third point of view, you're writing from the point of view of a character. So that character can only know, see, and feel what that character can know. Doesn't know what the other person is thinking or feeling. So you're writing just from a character's point of view, not a narrator looking down on the whole scene. And so it creates almost more of a movie type of experience rather than the omniscient. And with that movie type experience and that deep third point of view, it needs to click along and move faster. Today's reader has the attention span of a gnat, maybe half a gnat. And so we need to get them, we need to hook them, we need to keep them engaged. They're used to digital media, which is fast and intense and bombarding your eyeballs. And we almost have to recreate that with our fiction writing to keep people reading. Just a change in how we do things. But also back in the day, they released most novels as serials in magazines. They would be printed in magazines first. They got paid by the word. So if you read some of those classics, oh, wow, never use 30 words when 300 will do. They drug it out, so they got paid better. Nowadays, exact opposite. Nowadays they want to move everything along. Yes, ma'am.
As a disclosure, I've known Peg for a long time, but I have read almost all of those books and I highly recommend them.
Oh, thank you.
They're easy reads, I guess, because they're so simple. I don't know, but it's easy to get into the characters and you feel like you're there.
And one of the things I strive to do.
It's a bad day,
One of the things I strive to do is I'm writing for what we now call in the industry clean reads. There is no explicit sexual content. There's no gratuitous violence. There's no profanity. I want to write books that grandparents can hand to their granddaughters and share with them and not worry about the content. I can't say there's no violence in my books because I write about, post-war and wars. And so there is realistic violence in it, but there's no gratuitous violence to it. It's what we needed to know for the story. And anybody mid-teens up can read my books. without having to worry about content. Thanks for the recommendation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.